Section 1 of The Adventures of Bobby Coon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jude Somers. The Adventures of Bobby Coon by Thornton W. Burgess. Section 1. Bobby Coon has a bad dream. Bobby bites his own tail. And Bobby's dreadful fright. Part 1. Bobby Coon has a bad dream. Some dreams are good and some are bad. Some dreams are light and airy. Some dreams I think are woven by the worst kind of a fairy. Dreams are such queer things, so very real when all the time they are unreal, and that sometimes I think they must be the work of fairies. Happy dreams the work of good fairies, and bad dreams the work of bad fairies. I guess you've had both kinds. I know I have many times. However, Bobby Coon says that fairies have nothing to do with dreams. Bobby ought to know, for he spends most of the winter asleep, and it is only when you are asleep that you have real dreams. Bobby had kept awake as long as there was anything to eat, but when Jack Frost froze everything hard, and rough Brother North Wind brought the storm clouds that covered the Green Forest with snow, Bobby climbed into his warm bed inside the big hollow chestnut tree, which he called his, curled up comfortably, and went to sleep. He didn't care a hair of his ringed tail how cold it was, or how Brother North Wind howled and shrieked and blustered. He was so fat that it made him wheeze and puff whenever he tried to hurry during the last few days when he was abroad, and this fat helped to keep him warm while he slept, and also kept him from waking from hunger. Bobby didn't sleep right straight through the winter as does Johnny Chuck. Once in a great while he would wake up, especially if the weather had turned rather warm. He would yawn a few times and then crawl up to his doorway and peep out to see how things were looking outside. Sometimes he would climb down from his home and take a little walk for exercise. But he never went far and soon returned for another long nap. As it began to get towards the end of winter, his naps were shorter. He was no longer fat. In fact, his stomach complained a great deal of being empty. Perhaps you know what it is like to have a stomach complain that way. It is very disturbing. It gave Bobby no peace while he was awake, and when he was asleep it gave him bad dreams. Bobby knew well that no fairies had anything to do with those dreams. They came from a bothersome, empty, complaining stomach, and nothing else. One day Bobby had the worst dream of all. He had prowled around a little the night before, but had found nothing wherewith to satisfy his bothersome stomach. So he had gone back to bed very much out of sorts, and almost as soon as he was asleep he had begun to dream. At first the dreams were not so very bad, though bad enough. They were mostly of delicious things to eat, which always disappeared just as he was about to taste them. They made him grunt funny little grunts and snarl funny little impatient snarls in his sleep, you know. But at last he began to have a really, truly bad dream. It was one of the worst dreams Bobby had ever had. He dreamed that he was walking through the Green Forest, minding his own affairs, when he met a great giant. Being afraid of the great giant, he ran with all his might and hid in a hollow log. No sooner was he inside that hollow log than up came the great giant and began to beat on that hollow log with a great club. Every blow made a terrible noise inside that hollow log. It was like being inside a drum with someone beating on it. It filled Bobby's ears with a dreadful roaring. It made his head ache as if it would split. It sent cold shivers all over him. It filled him with dreadful fear and despair. Yes, indeed, it was a bad dream, a very, very bad dream. Part 2. Bobby bites his own tail. Oh, tell me, someone, if you will, am I awake or dreaming still? So cried Bobby Coon to no one in particular, because no one was there to hear him. Bobby was in a dreadful state of mind. He couldn't tell for the life of him whether he was awake or asleep and dreaming, and I cannot think of a much worse state of mind than that. Can you? There was that dreadful dream Bobby had had, the dream of the dreadful giant who had chased him into a hollow log and then beat on that log with a great club, frightening Bobby almost to death, filling his ears with a terrible roaring sound that made his head ache and sending cold shivers all over him. Bobby was trying to make up his mind to rush out of that hollow log in spite of the dreadful giant, all in his dream, you know, when suddenly his eyes flew open, and there he was, safe in his bed in the hollow chestnut tree which he called his own. Bobby gave a happy little sigh of relief. It seemed so good to find that dreadful experience only a dream. "Phew!" he exclaimed. "That was a bad, bad dream." And then, right on top of that, he gave a little squeal of fear. There was that awful pounding again. Was he still dreaming? Was he awake? For the life of him, Bobby couldn't tell. There was that same dreadful pounding he had heard in the hollow log, but he wasn't in the hollow log. He was safe at home in his own warm bed. Had he somehow reached home without knowing it, in the strange way that things are done in dreams? And had the dreadful giant followed him? That must be it. It must be that he was still dreaming. He wished he would wake up. Bobby closed his eyes as tightly as he knew how for a few minutes. Pound, 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 sounded the dreadful blows. Then he opened his eyes. Surely this was his hollow tree, and certainly he felt very much awake. There was the sunlight peeping in at his doorway high overhead. Yet still those dreadful blows sounded. Pound, pound, pound. His head ached still, harder than ever, and with every blow he jumped, and a cold shiver ran over him from the roots of his tail to the tip of his nose. Never in all his life had Bobby known such a mixed-up feeling. "Is this I, or isn't it I?" he whimpered. "Am I dreaming and think I'm awake, or am I awake and still dreaming? I know what I'll do. I'll bite my tail, and if I feel it, I'll know that I must be awake." So Bobby took the tip of his tail in his mouth and bit it gently. Then he wondered if he really did feel it, or just seemed to feel it. So he bit it again, and this time he bit harder. "Ouch!" cried Bobby. "That hurt! I must be awake. I'm sure I'm awake. But if I'm awake, what dreadful thing is happening? Is there a real giant outside pounding on my tree?" Then Bobby noticed something else. With every blow his house seemed to tremble. At first he thought he imagined it, but when he put his hands against the wall, he felt it tremble. It gave him a horrid sinking feeling inside. He was sure now that he was awake, very much awake. He was sure, too, that something dreadful was happening to his hollow tree, and he couldn't imagine what it could be. And what is more, he was afraid to climb up to his doorway and look out to see. Part 3. Bobby's Dreadful Fright. Poor, poor Bobby Coon! Now he was sure that he was really and truly awake. He almost wished that he hadn't tried to find out. It would have been some little comfort to have been able to keep his first feeling that maybe it was all a bad dream. But now that he knew positively he was awake, he knew that this terrible pounding, which at first had been part of that bad dream, was also real. The truth is, he could no longer doubt that something terrible was happening to his house, the big hollow chestnut tree he had lived in so long. With every blow, and the blows followed each other so fast that he couldn't count them, the big tree trembled, and Bobby trembled with it. What could it mean? What could be going on outside? He wanted to climb up to his doorway and look out, but somehow he didn't dare to. He was afraid of what he might see. Yes, sir, Bobby Coon was afraid to climb up to his doorway and look out for fear he might see something that would frighten him more than he was already frightened, though how he could possibly have been any more frightened I don't know. Yet all the time it didn't seem to him that he could stay where he was another minute. No, sir, it didn't. He was too frightened to go and too frightened to stay. Now can you think of anything worse than that? The tree trembled more and by and by it began to do more than tremble. With a dreadful, very dreadful sinking of his heart, Bobby felt his house begin to sway, that is, moving a little from side to side. A new fear drove everything else out of his head. The fear that his house might be going to fall. He couldn't believe that this could be true, yet he had a feeling that it was so. He couldn't get rid of it. He had lived in that house a long, long time, and never in all that long, long time had he once had such a feeling as now possessed him. Many a time had rough Brother North Wind used all his strength against that big chestnut tree. Sometimes he had made it tremble ever so little, and that was all, and Bobby, curled up in his snug bed, had laughed at rough Brother North Wind. He just couldn't imagine anything really happening to his tree. But something was happening now. There wasn't the smallest doubt about it. The great old tree shivered and shook with every blow. At last Bobby could stand it no longer. He just had to know what was happening and what it all meant. With his teeth chattering with fright, he crawled up to his doorway and looked down. Badly frightened as he was, what he saw frightened him still more. It frightened him so that he let go his hold and tumbled down to his bed. Of course, that didn't hurt him, because it was soft, and in a minute he was scrambling up to his doorway again. "What shall I do? What can I do?" whimpered Bobby Coon, as he looked down with frightened eyes. "I can't run, and I can't stay. What can I do? What can I do?" Bobby Coon was horribly frightened. There was no doubt about it, he was horribly frightened. Have you guessed what it was that he saw? Well, it was Farmer Brown and Farmer Brown's boy chopping down the big chestnut tree, which had been Bobby's home for so long. And looking on was Bowser the Hound. End of section 1.